Hi, I'm Jody, the mom.
And I'm Dr. Bar the doc, and this is Mom and Doc Talk, where we talk about all things healing pans and pandas with a special emphasis on homeopathy, which is the topic that we're going to cover today, is what homeopathy is. Just a really basic primer on what homeopathy is and how it works in the body, our current understanding of how it works in the body. And we're going to talk a little bit about our getting to homeopathy because, spoiler alert, we were both sort of dragged to it out of desperation, and both have some amount of skepticism related to homeopathy because homeopathy uses single substances found in nature prepared in a very dilute way. And this dilution is what brings about the most skepticism for people. It is so dilute that technically, before we learned about nanoparticles, we thought that there was none of the original substance left. We have since learned, just in the last just over a decade, that there are nanoparticles that are formed in the process. So basically, the way that a homeopathic remedy is made is you take one part, and there's a couple different scales for preparation. So I'm going to talk about what's called the centesimal scale for how it's produced, just because it's the easiest one and it's the one that's used most commonly. And so the centesimal scale, it takes 1 drop of the original substance. It can be a plant, mineral, animal source. So it takes 1 drop of that preparation and puts it into 99 drops of water. And then it's shaken, agitated very vigorously. So back when it was first discovered over 200 years ago by Samuel Hahnemann, he would use he would basically use a Bible and pound the vials against a Bible, so something that was really firm, and that process is then repeated multiple times. So then you would take that first vial that's made, the 1 drop to 99 drops of water, you would take 1 drop from that and add that to another vial that has 99 drops of water, do that vigorous shaking and agitation again, and then take a single drop of that into another drop of 1 to 99. So that third vial would be what's called a 3C potency. So it's been diluted 1 to 99 3 times. We actually usually start at like a 6C or a 30C. And by the time you get to 30C, if you're looking at the Avogadro's number, it's been dilute beyond the point where there's any measurable amount of the original substance left. And that's where people get really hung up. Again, this is before we had the ability, the technology to do imaging, where we found out that there actually is nanoparticles formed in that process. Because here's a trick. If you don't do that vigorous agitation and succussion of the vials between the dilutions, it doesn't work, because that's necessary to create those nanoparticles. And so we now know that there are nanoparticles that are formed. And so the reason I'm talking about this is the upfront thing, is because that's the biggest issue that people tend to have with homeopathy is, how can I give my kiddo nothing and expect them to get better? It's not nothing. That said, when I had to embrace homeopathy for myself, I still thought it was nothing, because I started learning of homeopathy before these studies came out. And that was my biggest hang up, was how can I be working with people who are quite unwell and give them magic water with nothing in it and expect that they're going to get better? And it wasn't until I had my own really strong motivation to give it a try, because my alternative solution that I was being given sounded significantly more cuckoo bananas to me, that I was able to embrace it works, and use that scientific training that I have to, even though I don't understand how it works, I can see verifiably that it does work with me and on repeat with all of the patients and people that I've worked with over the years. So I'm going to back up and talk to you a little bit about homeopathy and how it was discovered, and just a little bit about how we understand how it works and how it's recommended to people. And then Jody is going to tell us a little bit about how she got there too, because she's also a bit of a skeptic, or came to homeopathy skeptically. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that before we move on. So I already mentioned Samuel Hahnemann, who is the founder of homeopathy in the late 1700s, very late 1700s, is when he first started to discover this principle of homeopathy. And what homeopathy stands for is like cures like. And so he was doing some, he's a medical doctor working at the time when we used mercury and arsenic to treat things, doing a lot of bloodletting. And he recognized that more often than not, he was just making people sicker. And so he decided to quit practicing and went to work translating medical texts. And it was through these translations of multiple medical texts, because he spoke several languages, and that he came upon this principle from Hippocrates of like cures like, and he sort of tucked that away in his brain. And then later was translating what's called a monograph, like a description of how a particular substance can be used for, it was called Cinchona Bark, and it was talking about how it can be used in malaria. And the particular person who wrote this was making the suggestion that it was because of the bitter properties in the Cinchona bark that made it so that it was so effective against malaria. Well, Hahnemann, having done lots and lots of translations of various different monographs, knew that there were other plants, and he was a chemist, and was just a very smart guy. He knew that there were other things that were far more bitter than the Cinchona bark, and so he decided to try it out on himself and see what happened. So he took a preparation of Cinchona and ended up getting the symptoms of malaria. And then when he stopped taking it, he stopped getting the symptoms. And so he put 2 and 2 together, like cures like, oh, this particular plant is really good for malaria, but it causes symptoms of malaria in somebody who's a healthy person. And so started doing a lot more experimenting to find out, okay, what other plants, what do they cause in healthy people, things that we know can be used to treat certain things. If I give this to a healthy person, what do they cause? And saw that pattern repeated again and again and again and again. And then came to understand it as a law of nature, that something that causes symptoms that are similar to what somebody is experiencing when they take it when they're healthy, that they would experience when they're not healthy, can actually cure those symptoms. He gave some explanation for how that can happen. And like, again, we only in the last slightly over a decade have understood that nanoparticles are formed in the process of making it. So he was just trying to explain what he saw. Basically, what he explained is that every substance has a primary and a secondary action. And so the primary action, if you think about like coffee, its primary action is to make you really like revved up and super attentive and like alert. But its secondary action comes when it wears off, and then you actually feel worse, right? You feel very tired, very dull, and just not so great. That's the secondary action. And so what we're seeing happen with homeopathy is we're giving a very small amount of something that can avoid that primary action and just cause that rebound secondary action in the body as a response to the medicine that's being given. And that was his theory. Finding the very small doses happened just because he was using toxic substances. And so he was trying to dilute it as much as possible to not poison people who he was doing all these testing on, and found that he could get the secondary response with a very small dose, and it actually was more effective because you didn't have the really significant push of that primary action, where we really were able to get mostly just the secondary action for the response. So what we're doing when we're making a recommendation for a homeopathic remedy is we are trying to understand exactly what somebody is experiencing in their unwell state, so that we can then match it to all of the evidence that we have through all of these studies and provings, they're called, that are done on humans for humans, so we can match those symptoms. Like, here's your symptom, you have this cluster of symptom A, B, C, D, E. What substance can we find in nature that, if given to a healthy person, would cause A, B, C, D, and E, and as specific as we can get is what we want to look for. So we want to know if we're talking about migraines, I want to know that you have a migraine that is on the right side, and it's triggered from heat and sun, and it is a pounding, bursting pain, bursting outward, and pounding from the inside out, and that it's better when you are lying down in a cold, dark room, as quiet as can possibly be, and you have to lay on the painful side, or it hurts worse if you lay on the painful side. That level of detail, and like your face turns red, or it only turns red on the one side that's painful, but not red on the other side. That level of detail is the kind of thing that we're looking at. And so as we're talking through our series here, and we get more into like the homeopathy part of Jody's journey, which I'll be perfectly upfront, that's going to take us a bit of time to get there. We will have peppered in some ways that homeopathy can be effective in some of the stuff that she's going to talk to you about as part of the like healing journey. But it's going to be homeopathy heavy a little bit later in this series. So it can be really a shift in how you report symptoms and in how you talk about it. And Jody, I am going to pause because one of the reasons that we came together as a mom and doc to do mom and doc talks is so I don't go down rabbit holes and start using all sorts of phrases and terms that don't make any sense. So I'm going to ask you to tell me if what I have shared so far makes sense.
You are reading my mind right now. I'm channeling listeners and thinking one question is, can you tell us what is and isn't homeopathy? Is like a very like starting, like, because I didn't know that at all. I thought anything natural was homeopathy.
And that's a really good point. So natural and homeopathy don't necessarily go hand in hand. So homeopathy is natural, but everything that's natural is not homeopathy. So supplements, magnesium, herbs can be prepared homeopathically and be used homeopathically, but they're not necessarily homeopathy. So if you're taking like a big capsule or something, or a tincture or something, that's not homeopathy. It's herbal medicine, or it's a supplement, it's nutritional supplementation. It's when it's prepared in that dilute way, and when it is recommended based off of that principle of like cures like. So it's more about how it's used than about how it's prepared, honestly, because if we think about it, Adderall or any of the like methylphenidate, any of the medications that are used for ADHD, those are actually being used homeopathically. You're giving something that's a stimulant to somebody to calm somebody down who is overstimulated, right? And so we're looking for, again, that secondary action. So it's not necessarily about the medicine or how it's prepared, but it's more about how it's used, how it's prescribed, and the outcome that we're looking for. So natural does not necessarily mean homeopathy, but homeopathy is made of natural substances.
Yeah. And then what was the other one? They're all like things you find in nature. Like, give us a couple of examples just so people have a reference for that.
Yeah. So, I mean, there are getting more and more provings that are being done on things that are, not necessarily found in nature, but in order for it to be used homeopathically, it has to have had lots and lots and lots of studies to know what it can cause in a healthy person. And so what the rebound effects could be, or what it could be used to treat, basically. But most of them are going to be found in nature, the ones that have hundreds of years of reliable evidence of both studies being done on humans and then clinical verifications that they can actually be effectively used to treat those symptoms are going to be things from nature. So like I said at the beginning, plant, mineral, or animal source. So some examples of that, plant source belladonna is a really powerful medicine that can be used in pans or pandas, can also be powerful medicine in flus and migraines, in all various different types of pains. So it's not going to be something where you're using it for like this remedy for this or this remedy for this. It's going to be based off of the collection of the symptoms of a person as a whole. And so it really, many remedies can be used for many things. So belladonna is an example of a plant one. So is hyoscyamus or stramonium. Those are similar plants, have similar actions to belladonna. A mineral could be magnesium that could be used as a homeopathic remedy. Table salt can actually also be used as a homeopathic remedy. It's called Natrum muriaticum. Phosphorus, sulfur, just elements can be used as a homeopathic remedy. Again, it's when it's used in that specific way, right, with how it's prescribed. And then a plant or an animal source, sepia is a good example. It's made from the ink of a cuttlefish. Tarantula is another one that I like to talk about because it can be useful, especially in really violent rages where it's made from the venom of a tarantula. So those are some of the examples that we can see from animal sources as well.
Yeah. And I think that, if anyone listening right now doesn't, because what you said makes sense to me, because I've been listening to the explanation for a really long time, but in the beginning, it made zero sense to me, like zero. I couldn't understand any of that. And it still didn't make sense. So as we were going through Avery's journey and we were with all the specialists and doing all of the other things, there was two moms that were sending me messages on Facebook, and they were like, have you considered trying homeopathy? Homeopathy's worked well for my kiddo. And the first couple of times that happened, like literally the first time, I laughed and I was like, oh my gosh, because it wasn't the first time I had heard about homeopathy. Whenever I was younger, in high school and college, I dated someone whose mom was very into homeopathy. And we used to make so much fun of her, because we were like, oh, here she is with her sugar pill, or not so much fun of her, but we just giggled about homeopathy because it was like, oh, wait, what do you have going on? Like, take these sugar pellets and, it should help. And it just didn't make any sense. And so here I am standing looking at pans, and it still doesn't make any, like, how could a sugar pellet help this complex condition that my kid has going on? And like I said in the last episode, we did all of the things, literally all of the things other than plasmapheresis, and all of it made Avery worse. And there was, like, we were at the end of the road, nothing left. Still thought homeopathy was nuts. Thought that there was no possible way that it could work. Also, at the same time, I didn't really have any resources to go and find information. I mean, there was stuff out there about homeopathy, but nothing that applied it to what was going on with my child. But it was like all I had left, and I wasn't going to leave Avery where she was at because she was not okay. And so I was like, okay, let's try this. Let me start. And you know what's crazy is I think I was okay with starting and trying homeopathy because of the connection I had with you, as far as your past. And so we got started. I had no idea. Coming to our intake appointment, I didn't even know that we were going to talk about symptoms. Like, I knew we were going to talk about what was going on, but I didn't know like the detail or anything like that. We were, I would say, a good year in, and I still didn't understand exactly what was happening. But, and even much earlier than that, within the first like 2 to 3 months, it suddenly became less important how it was working, and what mattered was what I was seeing. Because I knew that the only thing that I was doing was homeopathy, and there was some significant changes happening. I think on her Avery's second remedy, I sent you an email and was like, oh my gosh, like, there she is. I just saw her. It had been months and months and months where she had just been gone. She was out of it. It was not Avery. And then all of a sudden, after a dose one day, it was like, whoa, like, who is that kid? And we went through a whole lot of, back and forth, but over and over and over again, that skepticism that I had, it's like homeopathy came in and squashed it. And even, with my husband, who's kind of in a very roundabout way in the mainstream medical world, very, very like, I need to see tests, I need to see data, like I need to see, like I need a scientific explanation of how this is working in our child's body. And just, he needed so much more than I even needed. And then that thing kept happening over and over again, where it just would have such a significant impact on her symptoms that it was like, okay, my understanding is no longer important. I'm seeing what I need to see. And that thing happened over and over again. Now I have more understanding, and really am really happy and settled, like super settled in with my understanding of homeopathy, because I think it's back to our roots, right? Our bodies were intended to work a certain way. We were given the things that we need to heal our bodies. And so I feel like it's like I took Avery from all of this complex pharmaceutical supplement craziness, and it's like I took her unknowingly at the time, took her back to simplicity, and this thing that actually had the ability to heal the dysfunction that was going on in her body. And so my need to understand deeper, I just have completely let go of that, because I've seen it get rid of everything. I've seen it take her from health, my whole family, from illness to health. And it, and this is why I love, we have this army of moms now that is also, screaming, hey, homeopathy works. It works really well. And so while it's hard for us to wrap our brains around, we can't, you can't deny the significant changes that it's making in our children.
And me being the skeptic that I am, I still am going to look for any opportunity that I have to understand and explain more about what's happening. And so that's why I'm so grateful for the awareness that we have now that there are nanoparticles that are formed. And there's been research that has shown that those nanoparticles can actually bind at the cellular level and lead to adaptive change on the cellular level. We're still figuring out where it goes from there, because what homeopathy does is it works, it's a whole body medicine. It's like a nudge to the body to heal, by, again, putting that primary, like a subtle push of that primary action to cause that secondary reaction. And somehow that leads to the body correcting itself and restoring balance on its own. It's not a biochemical force like those supplements and herbs and medications that you mentioned earlier. It's a nudge to the body to heal itself, so that it's addressing, and this is the most important thing. If you get nothing else from this video, this is probably the most important thing. It addresses susceptibility. Okay. And so what it's addressing is that tendency to have this reaction to this trigger. So we don't need to go in with homeopathy and kill the bugs or get the mold eradicated from the body or get rid of the allergens. You know, we can't avoid these things forever. Like, even if you keep your kiddo out of school, things are going to come and they're going to find you, right? If you live in a house with water running in it, mold will show up in your house, right? If you go and interact with any human anywhere, you're going to have the exposure to their bugs that they get. And so the reality is, it's not about the bug. It's not about the trigger, because we don't all have the same trigger. If it was about the bug, we would all get neuropsychiatric symptoms every time we got strep. It's about the specific susceptibility to having this type of reaction to the trigger, instead of the typical immune response to the trigger. And so what homeopathy does is it nudges the body to heal and reduces and eliminates that susceptibility, so that you can have exposure to strep, to mycoplasma, to Lyme, to mold, to tree pollen, to dog, whatever it happens to be that is your trigger or your kiddo's trigger, that you can have those exposures and not have a flare of neuropsychiatric symptoms. So susceptibility is what is really the true underlying cause of all of this. And that's what homeopathy addresses. And it's the only thing that addresses that level of susceptibility. Homeopathy works on the epigenetic level. It helps with all of those things that shift and change the way our genetics are expressed, because not all genes are turned on at one time. We'll talk about that in a future episode. That's a whole thing that we can talk about. So we don't know exactly what happens once that nanoparticle binds at the cellular level and leads to adaptive cellular change, but we know that we then see over time healing pushes, it nudges in the right direction to a healing response, and we see it systemically. So we aren't going to see, oh, here's your remedy for your headache, and here's your headache, here's your remedy for your constipation, and here's your remedy for your tics, and here's your remedy for your anxiety, and here's your remedy for your rage. All of that is an external manifestation of that internal imbalance, that internal susceptibility to having that response, which is why we use one remedy at a time to nudge the body in the right direction, and we see broad reaching changes. I can't tell you how often we see family members who talk about changes that they weren't even talking about that are improving because of a homeopathic remedy, because it's, you know, when we heal as a whole person. Everything is connected. Our migraines are connected to our gut stuff, are connected to our skin stuff, are connected to our mood. Yeah. It's all connected. We can't treat them separately because they're not separate. So what did I miss about homeopathy? It's so hard. It's such a broad thing to talk about, and to try and talk about it in such a short time, and to do it in a way for like that's introductory. I probably missed something huge here. So Jody, did I miss anything significant?
No, I don't think you missed anything significant. I think we, like, as we go, we'll talk more about definitely susceptibility, because, you know, I have to talk about susceptibility at least once a week. I think nothing other than, and I know you said, you know, the resilience naturopathic providers use one remedy. I don't think that you dove into classical homeopathy, but I don't even know that it's necessary at this point since we're just touching on it.
Yeah. So, I mean, we can at least touch on the fact that there are different types of homeopathy. What we are focusing on in this podcast is the classical homeopathy, which is basically the way that Hahnemann first defined it, and goes through with one remedy, minimal effective dose. And one remedy at a time. It could be a series of remedies that end up, meeting the person where they're at in the moment and what their body needs at that moment to continue the healing process. But it's a single remedy at a time, and it's used based off of empirical evidence. So the studies that have been done in people and repeatedly shown in people, and then also clinically verified with showing that it's actually effective in removing that symptom. So there's some types of homeopathy that use a lot of different things and try to take shortcuts with it. And that's not what we're talking about here. So we're not using any muscle testing. We're not using any bioresonance scans. We're not using any dream provings or meditation provings or anything that's not repeatable in a scientific way to show that this medicine can cause these symptoms. And it's been clinically verified that when used in treatment that it resolves those symptoms. That's what we're basing our conversation on, and that's what we use at Resilience Naturopathic, and the type of homeopathy that we discuss in the Facebook group. So what I am going to do to wrap up here is encourage you, if you want to learn more about homeopathy, because we've got a whole mini course in the Facebook group and lots of educational videos, tons, hours and hours and hours of educational videos. If you want to learn a lot more about the nitty-gritty details of homeopathy, I'm going to encourage you to join the group because that'll give you a jump start, because it's going to be several weeks before we get into the nitty-gritty details of homeopathy in this podcast. So that Facebook group is Homeopathy for Pans and Pandas, and you can head over to Facebook and request to join.
We also have the YouTube page. I think our mini series is on the YouTube page.
We do have a mini series on the YouTube page. So it's another resource to check out if for some reason you want to learn more, but you're not eligible to join that Facebook group. So just go to YouTube and search for Resilience Naturopathic. And there is a page there that you can follow and get all of the videos. If you're on YouTube, you might actually be watching this right now on YouTube with our page. So those are our current resources for learning more specifically about Pans and Pandas and homeopathy. So in our next video, we're going to actually get to start to dive into the story of Jody and her recovery and how everything got started. So we're going to start on our journey. We're going to step away from just homeopathy, just away from like basic things, and talk more about the overall journey of like finding out about Pans and Pandas, getting to discovery or to the diagnosis, and learning more about what's happening in the body and all of the different things that people typically go through. And our goal for that is to help you make some really good informed decisions and maybe skip some of the headaches that Jody went through, and recognize which things are going to be really beneficial for your family. So we hope to see you there.